It's been more than a decade since two young creators from the UK logged on to YouTube and unknowingly changed not just their own lives, but the lives of millions of people who would come to love them. This is the story of Dan Howell and Phil Lester, two people whose friendship turned into something deeper, something that fans always suspected but was never quite confirmed, until now. For years, the internet whispered about them. Entire fan communities spent hours analyzing every moment between them, every shared glance, every inside joke, every subtle smile that said more than words ever could. Were they just best friends or something more? And then, finally, in 2024, after more than 15 years of creating together, Dan and Phil sat down in front of the camera, like they had hundreds of times before, and decided to tell the truth. The video started like any other, a familiar setup. 2 chairs, 2 smiles, the same chemistry that fans had loved since the beginning. But this time, there was something different in the air, something honest, raw, and long overdue. Dan looked at the camera and said, "All right, let's get this over with. Are Dan and Phil in a relationship?" Phil smiled, turned to him, and simply said, "Yes." A single word that ended 15 years of rumors, speculation, and mystery. Dan laughed, pretending to get up and walk away, joking, as always, trying to break the tension. But everyone watching knew this moment was historic. It wasn't just another YouTube announcement. It was the closing of a chapter that began back in 2009 when these two creators met for the first time. Back then, YouTube was still new, a wild, creative frontier filled with vlogs, experiments, and awkward jump cuts. Phil Lester was already uploading videos as AmazingPhil, a cheerful, slightly awkward guy sharing stories about his life. Dan Howell, a shy teenager, admired Phil's videos and eventually reached out. What started as a fan message turned into a friendship, and that friendship became a creative partnership that would take over the internet. Soon after meeting, they started collaborating. Their first big video together, Phil Is Not on Fire, was spontaneous, chaotic, and hilarious. The kind of energy that perfectly captured who they were. Fans instantly loved it. It wasn't just the jokes or the games, it was the chemistry between them. They just clicked. Over time, they became inseparable. They moved in together, first in Manchester, then later in London. They filmed side by side, edited together, toured together, and even hosted a BBC Radio 1 show. Their friendship, or whatever it was, became a cornerstone of online culture. But as their fame grew, so did curiosity. Fans started asking questions. Were they dating? Were they more than friends? Dan and Phil never confirmed, but they also never denied. Instead, they kept the focus on their work, their humor, their projects, and their shared journey. They weren't hiding. They were protecting something precious. Dan once said that when you live online, you give a piece of yourself to millions of people. But some things, he explained, should belong only to you. And so for years, their private life remained exactly that, private. Still, their bond was impossible to ignore. They built a world together, one filled with creativity, laughter, and quiet understanding. Whether it was their YouTube gaming channel, their live tours, or their playful interactions, it was clear they shared something deeper than collaboration. Then came 2019, a turning point for both of them. Dan uploaded a video titled, "Basically, I'm Gay." It wasn't just a coming out video. It was a story of growth, fear, and acceptance. He talked about identity, loneliness, and the pressures of living under constant public scrutiny. He even admitted that he and Phil had once been romantically involved, though he stopped short of saying what their relationship was at that time. A few weeks later, Phil shared his own video, Coming Out to You, opening up about his journey and his truth. Fans celebrated both of them, but many were left wondering, are Dan and Phil still together? For years, the question lingered, but Dan and Phil had quietly stepped into new directions. Their joint gaming channel went on hiatus. Dan took time for himself, writing a deeply personal book called You Will Get Through This Night, focused on mental health and self-care. He later toured the world with his solo show, We're All Doomed, where he explored life, anxiety, and humor through storytelling. Meanwhile, Phil continued making videos on his own channel, keeping that lighthearted, comforting energy that fans had grown up with. His audience evolved with him, and he found new joy in creativity. They were still friends, still living together, still appearing in each other's projects, but their joint brand, Dan and Phil, seemed to fade into the background. Fans accepted that maybe this was just how things were now. Then, out of nowhere, in late 2023, something changed. Their gaming channel suddenly came back. The revival video was classic Dan and Phil, full of jokes, self-awareness, and a dramatic entrance where their digital avatars literally rose from a coffin. It was their way of saying, "We're back." That comeback sparked something new. They started planning another tour, their first joint project in years. By 2024, the Terrible Influence Tour hit North America, bringing fans together again in massive theaters. For many, it felt like watching two old friends rediscover their spark. And just as the world was falling back in love with them as a duo, they dropped the news no one expected. They were, and always had been, in a relationship. In their reveal video, Dan explained, "We fell into it hard and fast in 2009, and here we are almost 16 years later." Phil laughed, joking, "Stop telling me how long it's been." It was such a them moment. Sweet, funny, and deeply honest.